Welcome to Examining, a technology-focused podcast that dives deep. I'm Erik Christiansen.
And I'm Chris Hans.
And welcome to another episode of the Examining podcast, the technology-focused podcast that dives deep. Good afternoon, Mr. Hans. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. I didn't know we were doing the formalities, Mr. Christiansen.
Professor Christiansen. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
We have kind of a large slate of articles today.
Although I don't know how long it's actually going to take. I don't think we need to go do a super huge deep dive, but yeah, there's some interesting ones.
There's somewhat of a trend here, which is kind of I think it's all about kind of like walking things back. We're talking about Microsoft walking back changes to Windows. We're talking about kind of walking back some of the hype around AI. That's how I'm reading into this Anthropic article.
Yeah.
Kind of walking back some of the tech layoffs, at least from the AI side, because of course, OpenAI is going to expand its workforce. We're going to talk about that. And then Nvidia has to walk back the brutal backlash to DLSS 5, which I'll explain what DLSS upscaling is. And then we're going to talk about the advantage of 50-year-olds. So we're going to walk back the ageist comments that we've made in the past. No, we don't make ageist comments. I think we're actually quite fair. And then we're going to have a discussion on kind of the state of ChatGPT versus Claude based on, I guess, my experience. This is our tip. Our tips are kind of intermittent lately, but that's okay. We have tips when we have them. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I think maybe if you don't mind, I'll kick it off with this article. So I'm a subscriber. Paul Thurrott is one of my favorite tech journalists. It's Thurrott.com for those listening. So it's THURROTT.com. It's free, his website, but he has a bunch of articles for premium subscribers. I'm not a huge journalistic subscriber. I still get Wired magazine is mailed to me. That's my one. I like getting mail. I don't know why I don't like emails, but I like physical mail. In fact, I've been unsubscribing to all sorts of email related stuff. Like I'm thinking, or I dump a million articles into AI and be like, prioritize this for me. I'll never be able to read all of these. So there's just too much information, but I like getting physical mail. The only thing that I subscribe to journalistically other than that is Paul Thurrott. It's an annual subscription. He has a bunch of premium articles, and he just has because he's covered Microsoft as a specialty, and particularly Windows and the consumer side for like 35 years. Between him and Mary Jo Foley, who's I think I don't know where she works now. She might actually be working at Microsoft. I'm not sure. Those are the two like real Microsoft tech news experts. And we've talked about Microsoft a lot in the last few years because, of all the money they invested in AI, they've had huge changes. Really started under Steve Ballmer. I don't think Steve Ballmer gets enough credit because he's really the person who put Microsoft on being the cloud provider track. It was not Satya Nadella. I mean, Satya Nadella has of course continued that and he's done, a good job expanding data centers on Microsoft Azure. But Steve Ballmer was the one who pivoted the company. And so it's changed a lot. And I think what's interesting is that because Microsoft has become this kind of, it's not even really a tech company, according to Paul Thurrott anymore. He describes it as more of this like data center money management company that happens to make tech products at this point. But, the consumer side, we all think of Microsoft as Windows and Office, but that's not the dominant part of their business anymore. So it's interesting that that's how we think of Microsoft, but that's actually not where they make most of their money.
Yeah.
And I think Apple's moving that direction. I think Google has moved in that direction long ago. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a premium article. I can link to it to people, but you're going to hit a paywall. But I would, if you like what I'm talking about. It's his subscription cost to his site is not high. It's like, I don't know, 50-60 bucks US a year or something like that. And he did a really interesting article called Trust But Verify. So the Windows side of things has not gone well in recent years. So Windows 10 really introduced what Cory Doctorow called this idea of enshittification. So like how platforms get worse over time and kind of squeeze their customers, their business customers. Windows 10, for instance, was the first to have kind of like non-opt-out telemetry data, which is like a privacy concern. And there's all these things about Windows 10 and that were a problem, of course, that have continued with Windows 11. And Windows 11 was what, 2021? So it's not super new anymore. But one thing that's interesting is that there was a post that came out from Microsoft by Pavan Davuluri. So I think he is the one of the heads, if not the head, of kind of Windows. And I suppose in the next year, what they've signaled is that they're really going to refocus Windows around reliability. And this is an interesting thing for Microsoft. The reason I bring this up, and that's important, is that, yeah, you and I are Mac users at home, but like, if you're talking about institutions, very few institutions are rolling out Linux or Mac. It's Windows, right? It's like Dell computers on lease, mass deployment. Windows is designed for institutional configurability. So when Windows has a problem, it's a big deal because billions of people use Windows, right? So they're going to apparently improve reliability. And Paul Thurrott is kind of not rejection, but kind of cautious skepticism / criticism, because Microsoft has a long history of making Windows worse through unwanted changes. So the list he provides is, like I said, forced telemetry basically remains untouched. Kind of the bundled junk recommendations and suggestions, monthly updates that are kind of increasingly chaotic, cause a lot of reboots, things like that. Forced Microsoft accounts for sign-ins. So it's really tough now to sign into Windows without creating a Microsoft account. Now, there's advantages to creating a Microsoft account, and I don't think it's going to violate dramatically your privacy to have it. In fact, if you do have a Microsoft account with Windows 10, we've talked about that, you'll actually get a free year of extended support, because then your computer settings, not your data, but your settings are backed up, and that's how they're able to maintain that security, right? Edge promotion everywhere. So you can set your default browser to whatever you want. But if you click on a news article in the Microsoft news feed, it always opens Edge. Like it's always trying to force you to adopt Edge as its browser of choice, which is dangerous for Microsoft, of course, because of course they had antitrust action way back, partly as a result of Internet Explorer trying to be the dominant, and it was considered a monopoly. Strict hardware requirements for Windows 11 that are somewhat arbitrary, and I would agree with that, though there are also security reasons why they have those hardware requirements, so they're not totally arbitrary. And things like, OneDrive constantly nagging you to update your files. So these are like consistent UX problems that are persistent in Windows. And Microsoft has acknowledged some of these problems, and they're apparently signaling that they're going to do this philosophical reset where Windows kind of gets smoother and kind of fixing some of these things. Now, I don't expect they're going to roll everything back. So for instance, I don't think that they're going to change things like the hardware requirements for Windows 11. I'd be amazed if they make it so you can sign in easier without a Microsoft account, because of course they're a services company, so that works in their best interest. So maybe they'll want that, but they won't try to force Microsoft Office 365 down your throat all the time. Of course, then there's all the Copilot stuff. And the problem that Microsoft is having with Copilot is that there's like 15 things that all have the name Copilot, but they're all different. So Copilot in image generation and Copilot 365 and Copilot on the web, the Microsoft has branded everything the same, but they all have different functionality. So that was a huge mistake on their part, because Copilot is good if you use Copilot with ChatGPT, but not everything Copilot is ChatGPT, and it's a mess. So Paul basically says that there's a huge trust issue with Microsoft because they've kind of neglected the consumer side of their business for so long. and trying to squeeze as much revenue out of a per user basis as possible. And so, what do you think about this? They've done things like this in the past, but I don't remember a recent time where they've really said that they're going to double down on performance and smoothness and stuff like that. Usually, Microsoft is famous for not communicating with customers.
No, that's true. I don't think they really own up or say that they're going to go and take care of the issues that I mean, other than I suppose when we went from Windows 8 and then just rolled over to, there was 8.1 and then 10, right? I mean, that was something where they were going to try to completely redesign Windows altogether.
And of course, I would normally, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, one thing it just kind of came to mind, from the security updates perspective. One thing that I found, again, I'm on a MacBook right now, and then also my phone, but this was the first time ever Apple has done this, where it actually updated in the background on its own their security for the OS.
I feel like that's happened before, but it's rare. It usually requires a reboot.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what maybe it's something that they're going to start just pushing in the past or going forward.
Possibly.
But it makes sense. I mean, the security issues, when you go and don't update things, and that's why everybody, or for Microsoft wise, they were encouraging people to go from 10 to 11 so that they can go and make sure that it is secure and nobody has any kind of issues that way.
Yeah, and one thing that also occurred to me, I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if Microsoft is feeling a little bit more of a pinch from its competitors on the consumer side. I don't know how much this is actually true. I would say that if we were talking about, Mac OS maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we can make this case. I think, though, regrettably, Mac OS suffers from many of the same problems that Windows does in terms of like nagging you to, not as bad, but to subscribe to its services, iCloud backups, not nearly as bad as like OneDrive and stuff, but because they have a larger services business, they are prioritizing that more. Though I will say, if you turn that stuff off and say no, it typically doesn't ask you again, where, it doesn't automatically back up things to OneDrive without my consent. Microsoft is still a step ahead on that. But, with the introduction of liquid glass, which it doesn't bother me, but I don't love it. And I suspect that over time, Apple's had other user interface blunders in terms of and design. So this is, when the iOS 7, everything went super flat. Skeuomorphic was also a problem. So this is like early days of a new language. So I think it'll settle out over time and it'll be fine. But I think it's different and people have to learn it. And so I don't know that they're feeling the pinch from Apple, maybe a little bit. I do wonder if they're feeling the pinch from Linux. There's a lot of I don't know if we had talked about this a while back, but after Windows 10 end of support, Linux distributions, some of them saw the most downloads like ever, right? Because people have this perfectly good hardware. It doesn't have to be as old as, my old 2013 Mac. That actually is quite old. That's 13 years old, that computer now. So that's kind of on its way out. But, computers that are, 2017, maybe 2018, or just missed the hardware requirement, or they do meet the requirements for Windows 11, but they're kind of on the early generations of those processors that support those security features. Like, I forget what they're called off the top of my head. So maybe they're a little sluggish. The performance on Linux is far superior of all the other operating systems. And so I wonder sometimes if, because open source tools, maybe not just operating systems, but like LibreOffice is, do I like it as much as Office? No, but it's a lot better than it used to be. These things are not as difficult to install anymore. They're a lot more compatible than they used to be. And in a world where most people are using, web email, web apps, there's not as much that you leave behind, going to another operating system. I mean, obviously, like if there's some things that would be difficult for me to totally translate to Linux, but it would be much more doable today than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. And I wonder sometimes if they're actually losing users to this.
I mean, it's hard to say. Like I saw something just recently, from, and it was like further to our last episode where we looked at how many, what the market share was for laptops. But I mean, still Windows is the dominant one. I mean, Lenovo was, I think, number one, and then it was HP, Dell. Then you had, Apple, but then there's a whole slew of other Windows-based types of computers. So, like you say, in the professional workplace standpoint, I mean, whatever type of organization, chances are high likelihood you're going to be using Windows.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just interesting that they're focusing so much on the consumer side. We'll see if they actually come through with it. I think it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. There are, some advantages to running Windows, but it has gotten more and more frustrating over the years. And I'd be curious to see if they come through on making it easier to unbundle kind of crapware from their operating system and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you want to talk about this Anthropic article called, what 81,000 people want from AI?
Yeah, so this was a study that they did, Anthropic, and it was about what people are actually valuing from AI. And so they interviewed over 80,000 people from 159 different countries, 70 languages, and a lot of the key kind of themes that were coming out of it, that people wanted more control over their daily life, less administrative work, more time, better learning, more financial room. It does kind of support them with their creativity, access expertise that they may not otherwise have. It's quite an interesting study. Like if you go and take a look at the website, and I'd encourage everybody to go and look at it. But I mean, there was all sorts of quotes from different people, but like some of the examples that I found that I took away, like for instance, there was a software engineer in the US that used AI to cut a 173-day process to 3 days. And then there was another one that I found interesting. There was a mute worker in Ukraine that used it to build a text-to-speech bot. And another one that I liked was there was a freelancer in United States that used Claude to help connect the dots after 9 years of misdiagnosis of health-related issues. And so, it was just really interesting kind of study that they've done. I mean, there are trade-offs, obviously, where people are maybe concerned about or they're worried. There's like this kind of caution that that people are describing how maybe from losing the ability to go and think, or if they've used it for emotional support, maybe there's going to be too much dependence on that. Some people brought up how if it does save them time for work, that maybe some of that extra time is just going to be filled with more work. So, I did find one of the interesting things with this report is that people are not just judging AI in terms of the speed alone. They are judging whether their life is getting better in terms of their work. And so, I think that's really important, especially if you are going to go and try to build something AI related, or if you're looking to implement or buy AI, setting policies for AI. These are some of the things that you should look at, considering. So
I see. Yeah, one of the things that struck me about this is that there's seems to be a trend where people are really using these tools. I like it. It's less spectacle, more like practical. People see it as kind of infrastructural, right? They're seeing it more
Yeah.
as like the internet, or kind of a foundational tool. And to really connect dots, see bigger pictures that are really tough to do manually, or solve bottlenecks. And that's certainly been my experience. Like when I tell people I'm a heavy AI user, I think they have this assumption that I'm getting to go and do everything for me, which is not the case, right? Because there's lots of things like writing, which I consider thinking, and you and I have discussed this before. Yeah, I like to do my own writing because it's my own voice. I don't want it to be perfect. That's not me, right? Not being perfect is part of the brand. But, you know, I gather tons of news stories. I'm struggling, threading disparate ideas together. Same thing when we're doing these podcasts. Like, how would I, what is connected through all of these stories that we found to make a show title? And do you have some ideas for me? These are bottlenecks. These are looking at big pictures and giving me some options to work with. And sometimes it's totally wrong, but other times it comes up with really interesting stuff. And so, like the idea of the misdiagnosis, well, that's a perfect example. Specialization is valuable, but it also creates a problem, because then it means everybody has an opinion. And if you're a specialist, that's your specialization is your hammer, and everything looks like a nail that fits that hammer. And so to get, how do you draw connections between different disciplines and different opinions in a less biased way? I think that's, AI is not totally unbiased, but that's obviously based on how it's trained. But there's certainly some, I think there's evidence that there's less bias in some cases than when people do it.
Yeah. Well, and again, like the people, and this is where I think this study has helped. Like, people want to go and make sure that the AI is useful for them. It's accessible. It's helping with their actual human needs, and not just some kind of impressive demos that they're trying to put together. And so, like you say, like those bottlenecks, like if there's things that you're kind of stuck with, because going and doing, let's say a Google search, like how we would have done to try to find or solve some sort of problem. This is something where, and again, like you say, it could be wrong, but
so can Google
generally
search,
speaking,
right? I mean, so can articles you find. Everything can be wrong.
yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. But usually it's not bad. I mean, I find it is quite useful when you're trying to go and figure out even just the most minor things, and not have to again waste time combing through like Google searches.
yeah, one of the things that I found really interesting about AI is like this incredible focus on what it does get wrong. It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh yeah, eat one small rock per day, or whatever Google Bard, it's, their AI had said to keep up your vitamins or something like that. And there's, if you look for problems, you'll find them. If I go through my house with a magnifying glass, I will find cracks in drywall, and I will find dings, and I'll find these problems. I will find them. People are really good at finding problems, and that's what they're fixated on. But that's not really the point, right? I would say that the AI overwhelmingly gives me more things that are correct than wrong. I'm not saying that doesn't mean I don't verify things to make sure that they're right. That's a literacy problem, and I don't think that really changes. I don't think AI really changes that, but it can certainly spark inspiration to look in other places. One of the funny things that I've noticed is that people have said, I just don't see how it could be useful for me. These are the kinds of things I do, and I don't know how AI would help me. And I'm like, well, why don't you ask the AI and explain what you do, and be like, is there anything that you could do that would be beneficial? Like, that's kind of a super meta question, right? But I think where people find value in these tools, it's by asking the tools, like, look, go to the tool, say, I'm not an AI user. This is not my area of expertise. This is what I do. I don't know how you'd really be able to help me. Give me some ideas and ask some follow-up questions. It'll do that. Exactly. I don't know how to prompt you to do these things. Well, why don't you ask it how it should be prompted? Like, it's actually funny. You can ask the tool about the tool and get information for the next chat that you start. And if you have memory turned on and tell it to remember things, it starts to build this lexicon. I think it's a different way of thinking about information seeking.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. Like, one thing that I've now observed just going and doing some observations and this research. Is a lot of people, the ones that have used AI, they're not using these large language models like how they're meant to be used in terms of like developing the prompts and so on. And so they're almost like treating it like Google search and doing these little basic prompts. And I think that suggestion that you made, if you don't know how to prompt something, and depending on whatever your end task or use case is, you could go and develop a better prompt just by asking the platform.
And the platforms work better if you include special instructions. Both Claude and ChatGPT, which are my primary ones, allow for that. And I have, be concise. I have a few basic things. I had not updated the OpenAI instructions for a long time, but I do have memory turned on, and I save a lot of the chats that are not confidential. Confidential things I'll use temporary.
Yeah.
Things that I archive a lot of stuff if I'm, just so it keeps that memory. But I actually said, based on your memory of me and the things I've been asking, like, do you have recommendations for how I would update the custom instructions? Here's what I currently have. And it was like, yeah, actually, here's a bunch of things that you ask me to do all the time that you may want to put in the instructions so you don't have to. That's cool. Really helpful, right? So, I mean, it knows what I'm asking. I can't keep track of what I've asked it. It can. And so in that way, it is kind of more of a conversational, like a friend, but with a much better memory, right? So
yeah, for sure.
It doesn't surprise me that people are using it for saving time and connecting the dots. I mean, that's certainly what I've found. Oh, here's 50 articles I've collected in Pinboard. I'll never get a chance to read all of these. Based on what you know about me, where should I prioritize my time? Here's your top 5. These other ones are iffy. It could be wrong. A lot of the time it's right on the money. You're right. Yeah. I'm not interested in that. This is a much better suggestion than what I would have picked, right? So I think maybe people are embarrassed to admit that it maybe knows things about you that you don't know about yourself, just from, not because it's thinking, but because it remembers what you've asked over and over again. It has a better memory, right?
Yeah, I haven't used it for emotional support yet, so I can't say anything on that note. But
Daniel Pink has a great video on that. It's like brutal questions that you can ask ChatGPT, like where am I holding back and where am I lying to myself? And he has all these prompts you can use, and it's just brutal. The answers it gives you. I tried it. It's pretty interesting.
This might be a good segue to the next article.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, again, you have looked at this, well, perhaps more closely than I have, but again, kind of walking back, we've had all these tech layoffs. I don't think so much because of AI automation. I think because there was huge hiring during the pandemic, and now they've overhired and now they're slowly letting people go. I think that's more likely. I don't think there's a huge productivity gain yet from AI. But it's said that Gadget and others, Financial Times is reporting that OpenAI plans to nearly double its workforce. So they plan to grow the workforce from about 4,500 to about 8,000 by the end of this year, with hiring across product engineering, research, sales, technical ambassadorship. That sounds like something you and I could do to help customers adapt its tools. It says they're expanding their office space in San Francisco. I think they're trying to make more inroads into enterprise, and that's something that Anthropic has done really well, probably better, though they have that big government contract with the States now, so I guess they've won on that front. Financial Times said that more than 90% of their 900 plus million active users, that's so many monthly active users, are still on the free account.
Yeah.
So, less than 10% pay for ChatGPT Plus.
Well, and I guess in terms of that, that was one thing that I guess they're rolling out the ads to the free accounts so that they can offset that. But I mean, I think
the
again,
lower end account. I think there's a more base level account now. Is that right?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the actual account.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
Configurations, but I think the big thing here it's just funny, like you say, there's all these companies doing massive layoffs. I mean, we talked about it, I believe it was last episode or the one before, but like Block laying off half of its workforce, and there's all these companies laying off thousands of people. And, they're citing that the reason is because of AI and increasing the productivity and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of it, what I find kind of interesting and somewhat kind of ironic is that the AI companies are actually, like OpenAI, are increasing the amount of people that they need. And so again, I mean, it could be because they overhired, and I think a lot of it was maybe something like during the pandemic when you had they probably misanticipated the amount of growth or the demand that they were going to have, and so they hired all these people, and especially trying to get people back into the office and not having the amount of productivity or the output wasn't there,
or and desks so, available.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point too. I mean,
the government of Canada did that, right? Because they had of course a remote. You had to go back to office, but there wasn't enough office space for people to return up, so that they had to show up, and there's nowhere for them to work. And you can't just bring in your own device if it's a secure network and just like plug in. It doesn't really work like that. So people were just standing around doing nothing, which is not productive at all. It's kind of incredible, actually.
So, but yeah, again, I think if you look at the messages that even though you have this technology, this AI is a tool just like any other tool, and you do need people to go and execute and put it into practice. So
yeah, it's really interesting. I don't think well, again, like I said, I think a lot of the layoffs, they can say it's AI and they can kind of blame it on that. But I don't know that that's true. That's the reason that Microsoft and Amazon have laid off lots of people. I'm not so sure that that's the reason.
Yeah,
I think there was a lot of high. I don't think I'm not saying that AI won't automate things in the long run. I don't believe that it's had such a productivity gain that they can lay off 10% of their workforce yet. I think that's more, there was a lot of hiring done during the pandemic, maybe over hiring, and then those things are kind of coming home to roost. And of course they can blame it on AI, or they can try to spin it as a productivity gain, even though they're losing all that people because AI is here now. There's a bunch of reasons why they may claim that, like Block laying off many of its people. It could also signal problems in the economy that nobody wants to talk about too, right? So
well, exactly, right? Like it's easier to go and blame AI as opposed to just talking about I mean, if your share price is going down, this is an easy way to fix it if you get rid of a whole bunch of people, because now there's hard costs associated with those.
Exactly.
And the expenses aren't there. I think the other thing, although I still think from an accounting standpoint, it doesn't really make sense to me, but it's a matter of going and investing in the capital infrastructure for AI, and so they're kind of allocating the operational money toward these capital costs.
They can't afford to keep all these people if they spend $100 billion on data centers, right?
Yeah.
And so
actually, on that note too, I can't remember if we mentioned this last week, but I was having a discussion with one of my PhD classmates about this, and we've talked about this before, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but where there's all this, like, it's getting into like many billions, like hundreds, it might even be like close to $1 trillion money.
I think it's $900 billion the big companies have committed over the next few years to spending on AI infrastructure. It's some ridiculously large amount of money.
Like it's crazy, right? Now, imagine, look at this has happened in the past, right? And a lot of it, like you're saying, even like we're walking back or what have you, but I recall back in the day, there was IBM would have their mainframe computers, and then we would use terminals, and then somehow the personal computer got created, and then we moved away from the mainframes to this. Then we've kind of been switching back with this cloud infrastructure, where you can offload some of the files and other things off to the cloud. And so, but imagine if these small language models, and this is what we've been kind of thinking is going to happen, if your personal device or these smaller devices can go and do that, what's going to happen with all these data centers? And I don't know. I mean, this is like, is it the best approach that we're taking?
Yeah, so I kind of have two minds about that. So if everybody, so there's kind of two things happening. So for people listening, depending on what model you use, you know, that like a thinking reasoning model versus an instant model, like when so if you go into ChatGPT, and I'll use that as an example since that's the most popular platform by far, I think still has like 80% or 60 to 80% market share of all these chatbots, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more energy usage used to use the high-end models, or Claude, Opus versus Sonnet. Yeah, Opus uses much more, so they don't make a lot of money on this stuff. So there's a financial incentive, and you know, a lot of the models are really good for, like, if you're uploading documentation and doing complex things, analysis of text. It doesn't have to be data analysis, but like, well, text is data, it's qualitative, right? If you're not doing that, you don't always need those models, which is why they're trying to promote, like, the default is like automatic. It'll automatically send you to the model. And overwhelmingly, I think it's going to send you to the cheaper model because they're going to lose less money on it. But with regards to the data center build out, I think there's two pieces of it. So on one hand, they're going to encourage people to fall back to smaller models in the cloud or use models offline, which is what I've been working with a lot, just to see. For basic tasks, basic summarization, you don't need these frontier models to do that. But at the same time, I think there's also going to be huge demand just by the number of users they're going to be using this over time, right? Like even the percentage of people who regularly interact with AI, I don't remember the article, but we talked about it on a previous episode. It's a pretty small percentage of people worldwide,
Yeah.
like 30 globally, it's like 30%. Of course, more in the United States and in the West, but even still, a huge percentage of people, over 50% in Canada or something like that, are not using this stuff at all. And so imagine when it becomes like everybody is using it, even if people are using it for really with simplest models in the cloud, that's a lot of potential users are coming down the pike. I think that's why they're building it out, but they want to ping the servers in an efficient way. And I think that's tough to do. So that's probably where they're making the bet. Also consider that by spending the money and owning the infrastructure, becoming the AT&T, the utility company, and Paul Thurrott pointed this out, companies like Microsoft can kind of win by losing. So Copilot is kind of a mess. There's nothing wrong with Copilot using the ChatGPT models. It works really well. But they have lots of different copilots, and it's not clear which ones use which models. And so they have a major communications branding problem. And that's one of the reasons why they don't have the market share. You'd think that they would have, but they've already been supplanted by Google, right? They're just not top of mind. But if they own the infrastructure and the cloud data centers that they can host their competitors to, they can kind of win by losing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how I see it. We'll see if it pans out. I think there's probably an enormous amount of pressure from these companies internally to stay relevant long term.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So
you're going to cover the next one here?
Yeah. So there's on this trend that we're covering of kind of walking things back. They haven't walked anything back yet, but this is certainly a backlash. So Nvidia had a presentation. I don't know if it's Nvidia or Nvidia. I've always called it Nvidia, but anyways, maybe it's Nvidia. They have their, historically a graphics card company, but it turns out graphics cards work really well for AI. So they've kind of pivoted their whole business to AI, so much so that they're really the only people in this whole Ponzi scheme of money moving around that actually makes any money. Because, well, I hate to say it, but
that's true.
there's this weird thing going around where Microsoft well, we'll buy $1 billion of your graphics cards, but then we get $1 billion here, and suddenly, well, $1 billion goes out, one comes in and they say we made 2 billion. Like, where do these numbers come from? It doesn't make a lot of sense. All these companies, there's just money circulating between the big companies. Yeah. But Nvidia is the only one where the money seems to be flowing in and staying there because they actually sell a real product, which is a physical graphics card. And they have a bunch of graphics cards that are not so much for gaming, but for AI. And so there was some rumors that they weren't going to do much on the gaming side because even though they're the dominant, they make the best graphics cards from a performance standpoint, their top of the line cards can cost a couple of $1,000 a piece. And so they've kind of had indicated earlier this year that they weren't going to do much on the consumer graphics front because they're not making as much money on it. The revenue's not there. Why not focus on AI? But they did unveil DLSS 5, generative AI, Ars Technica calls it, and backlash to NVIDIA's DLSS 5 generative AI glow-ups. So DLSS is an upscaling technology. So when you play a video game, let's say you want to play it at 4K, some games will run natively at 4K, meaning that the textures in the game they are 4K textures. That's very difficult to do, especially for the most demanding games. Often you may get a native 4K older game, or that's been upscaled or something like that. But a lot of these games run at 1440p, 1080p internally. And there's kind of a machine learning algorithm that upscales it to 4K, right? Just kind of like I've been doing some photo touch-ups. I have some old photos that are kind of worn and tattered. One of those is my late cat. And so I uploaded them to AI and asked it, clean this photo up and upscale it to 4K. Super handy, right? So it's similar. And DLSS is their technology for doing it. Of course, AMD, their competitor, who's a CPU and a GPU maker, has something called FSR. That's their version of it. But DLSS is really impressive. But this DLSS 5 uses a much more aggressive use of generative AI to kind of alter the visual output of the game. So it's not just upping the resolution, it's actually making changes to the artistic vision, which is new. We haven't seen this before. And so this huge backlash because it's changing kind of the look, the mood, and much of the artistic intent of some of these games. And again, people are starting to call this AI slop, but they're not, I don't think they're wrong in this case. I push back on that term. So for instance, if you look at the Ars Technica article, they have some images of what the upscaling graphics is doing. So one of the top image at the top of the screen is the one that's kind of gone viral, but there's others too. And so there's what's the game called? I think it's Resident Evil Requiem. It's the new Resident Evil game. It's incredible that Resident Evil has lasted this long as a game franchise. I mean, that's been around since I was a little kid, but they horror games, they continue to go. So there's a main character. I don't play Resident Evil, so I don't know the character's name. And there's like a scene where she's like lost her parents or she's wandering the streets. And on the left, that shows what she's supposed to look like. And she's supposed to look a little bit in the game because she's been through some tough times, a little haggard, that's a dark kind of a gritty mood and atmosphere of the game. She's not supposed to be wearing kind of any makeup or anything like that. And then they run the game through DLSS 5 with this upscaling plus generative AI. And it not only does that, but it kind of makes her, when you generate images of people and they all look like beautiful and perfect, and AI, it kind of does that with the game. So now her hair, which is kind of, blonde, now it's blonde with like highlights. Now she has eyeshadow. It looks like she's had a nose job because the bridge of her nose is thinner. Her lips are fuller. Looks like she's been given like a beauty makeover, right? And the background is also interesting. So in the original screenshot, again, the new version is much clearer because they've upscaled the resolution, but the background before is supposed to be gritty, foggy, wet. It's much brighter and cleaner. It doesn't have that feel at all, right? And the sky is brighter, the lighting is very different. And so I think a lot of people are really concerned about this because they make a game and these are really handcrafted. I mean, people may use AI to help generate textures and do things, but there's a lot of hand artistry that goes into game development. And then they roll out this tool, which is optional. You can turn it off. That, turns the game and kind of turns the characters into just generic AI looking people.
I mean, the one thing that I saw, and I didn't look into it much, but I just saw some people posting that are friends of mine that are gamers. And apparently there's, a lot of these video games, they actually take like motion capture of the actual person and get a whole bunch of like 3D.
And they probably signed that to look like them, right?
Yeah.
Like they've signed contracts for that.
Yeah, and then I think it was Harrison Ford. I think they did it for him.
Yeah,
and the person, like, after doing all of this, the scans and everything of him, and
for the Indiana Jones game, which I played, which was terrific, which just looks the game, and whoever played his voice, because it wasn't him in the game, sounds just like him. Like, they did a really good job. It looks just like Harrison Ford.
But with this DLSS 5, it didn't look like him. And so that was so that was kind of interesting. Like, again, like how you're saying that it's like changing the actual image. So it's interesting anyways.
Yeah, it's somewhat concerning. I mean, in some ways they could be tweaked or done something like that. And there's all these like memes now coming out. Yeah. But somebody, I'm looking at some, I think one of the examples was Starfield. Yeah, it kind of makes everyone look like a K-pop star. That's kind of how I see it. I mean, everyone looks very pretty with DLSS 5 turned on. And it's really funny. So, and some of the results are well done, where it sticks to the vision of the artistry. And others are not, right? And so I don't know what to say about it. But there's some terrific memes that are obviously jokes. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think it goes back to, what you mentioned when we don't want our writing to be perfect, and here it's it's like, okay, well, for the images, they don't need to be, especially for that artistic vision, they don't need to be perfect either. Right? It should
well, it's also just no fun, right? Like, it's no fun to have everybody look the same. It's no fun to have all writing sound the same. Like, I hate to say it, but like, I don't know about you, but my experience, it's interesting watching the evolution of a platform like LinkedIn. LinkedIn didn't used to have a feed hardly at all. It was just, you could see their network. It was very limited. It reminds me a lot of Facebook now, but and it has that feel because it's algorithmically curated. But it's just, I can tell, like, a lot of the posts sound the same. They have a very similar look and feel to them. They have very similar intros, outros. So clearly people are using AI for social posts. I can tell when it's written by hand. I'm confident that I can tell the difference. Now, in full transparency, for our social posts, I do get AI to help, but I've given the AI all sorts of examples of all the styles. We have a style for our posts that we design by hand. And so I feed those examples into it, and then I go and heavily edit it after the fact. So I'm just doing it to get it going, because I'm not here trying to write War and Peace. I'm trying to get some communication out, and then I go and change it with my own style after. But it's following the guidelines that I've given it, which I think is very different. And I've noticed that a lot. A lot of things are starting to sound generic. It kind of speaks to the idea of the dead internet theory. If everything is AI generated, there's no human connection anymore.
Totally.
So it's unfortunate. I guess this is why people call this stuff AI slop, but it's kind of funny. Did you want to talk a little bit about your generation?
My generation. I think I read this, even that word slop, it was the word of the year for 2025.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that should be word of the year, but it's certainly funny.
Yeah. But yeah, so this last article, so this was about the hidden advantage of being over 50 in the age of AI. And the author of this article, he talked about building his first website in 1995. And then he noticed some people, like he's been watching some young founders, they're going and developing apps. And he thought, maybe I've missed my moment or the time or what have you. And but after starting to use the tools, and he reached a different conclusion. And it's like, yeah, the AI, it does help get things done easier, but the edge comes when you can go and use your own judgment. And so he was talking about how his actual practical experience, where he uses the AI to stress test a business idea or find some blind spots in a launch plan, or uses the AI to challenge his assumptions or flesh out an existing model. And so this is where the usefulness of these prompts is only if you actually have the knowledge of the business well enough so that you can push back on the output and critique it. And so this is where, like, this technology, the AI wave, may actually reward people who are experienced more than people expect. And yeah, sure, the fast hands, it does help, trying to get access to the tools and getting things outputted really fast. But it's really where the clear thinking matters. And so if you have that experience, having whether it's some sort of failure that you've had, customer context, mistakes that have been made over the years, like those are things that take time. And so, yeah, the prompting is easy, but good judgment, it does take time and many years. And so this is where the people who, and I agree with this, I think the people who are maybe in their 50s might actually be able to benefit more in this current state of affairs. It's not like you've just missed the window.
Yeah, I think maybe the millennials, well, a certain percentage of the millennials, depending on when they're born, and people who are from kind of Gen X may have an advantage here because, like you said, because they might be the last generations that develop those experiences without the tools, right? And I sometimes think about that with writing or literacy. Like, I can go through the AI and go, that's not very good, and this isn't going to come across very well as a communication. But if you've grown up with those tools and are you going to be able to learn the same skills? I'm not saying that people won't be able to learn them, but I wonder if they'll be able to learn them in the same way.
Well, and I look at it even, here we're in Alberta, and look at over the years, there's been many times where there's people in the oil and gas sector, because there's the boom and bust kind of cycles. And I quite often have seen over the last 20 years where there's people who are really experienced. They can't even retire because, they have so much institutional organizational knowledge, and we aren't going and investing as much in terms of that, whether it's like reservoir engineering or other type of roles. And so they've had the decades of experience, and so they can go and actually come back as consultants. And so again, I think this may be a really good opportunity if people can get comfortable with the uncomfortable, where this technology keeps changing at a rapid pace, but taking the time and care to actually apply their judgment and discernment to what is coming out, test those ideas, and be able to apply it so that you're not actually making huge mistakes. Because again, I could see, imagine some of these young people who are like vibe coding something. It might look good for like a demo, but again, if you haven't had the experience, I don't know if they'll be able to scale. And so again, that's where you'll probably need somebody at some point to help go and code and develop, so it's a robust platform.
Yeah, like I don't think you can vibe code production quality stuff, not yet.
No, not yet.
I can see this becoming, like a problem. People don't know the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And knowing kind of where the limits of these tools are, because there's always limits, right? There's always edge cases, there's always things. And if everybody's using the same tools as you and you want to do something innovative, you're going to need to think.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Hopefully, I hope that we do have that. I think that's all we had for articles today. I guess the tip / final discussion, and this doesn't have to be a super long thing, was to talk about kind of the two leading platforms. I mean, I guess Gemini and Copilot could be considered leading AI platforms. For arbitrary reasons, I'm going to deem the leading platforms Claude and OpenAI.
Yeah. Well, they're certainly getting the most media attention right now.
Sure. And so ChatGPT commands the biggest user base, but Claude's having a big moment, not just because of the controversy with the contract in the US government, but just, people using it. And so I've had actually the paid version of both of these. It's just getting really expensive, but not really in the grand scheme of things. It's a drop in the bucket. And there's certainly pros and cons. So you're mostly on ChatGPT playing with it, which is probably good. I had a question from somebody the other day. I guess the reason this came to mind is that, like, which of the tools should I subscribe to? I think the Ethan Mollick advice is good, which is that you can switch between the tools, but unless you're hosting a podcast on technology and comparing them for a discussion point, I don't think you should have more than one. Mastery of one will give you the skills that translate to another tool if you switch. And there's pros and cons to these. I would say that if you are doing mostly, my experience after kind of like a couple of months of using both of them side by side is that you're primarily doing a lot of data analysis, code, or analysis of large text documents. And so you're not using imagery, you're not looking at as many connector apps, things like that. Claude is probably your better bet. It has a much larger context window for large, you can put in like 500-page documents and it'll do a much better job of analyzing it if you need it to do that. And its writing style is much more less AI sounding. So from a writing tool, like if you work in communications or something like that, Claude is probably better. But you don't get any image generation. There's far fewer connectors and apps that connect with it. From a coding standpoint, it is better, I think, overall. I'm not a programmer by trade, but I do use it as kind of like for hobbyists, add-ons, changing, code and WordPress templates and stuff like that. But, ChatGPT Codex is also very good. Depends on the level of code that you need to do. One of the things I've noticed, though, that's kind of interesting from just an organizational standpoint is that from just like a chat management perspective, I think OpenAI has an advantage. One of the things I like about both of them is that you can create project folders. And so for these tools, you can kind of give overarching instructions to how it should address you, what kind of writing tone you want. But if you create a project folder, so I have one called Personal, for instance, I can actually make settings for each project folder. So then, and this is the same for Claude and ChatGPT. And so I can put in a bunch of, things about myself, personal interests. That's kind of what the instructions say. Keep in mind, these are Erik's interests for personal projects. Work might have different ones. I have one called Notes, and the instructions for the Notes project folder is like exactly how I want notes to be formatted and what I want it to do. And so that's kind of cool. And you can do the same thing with Claude. The only thing I don't like about Claude, though, is that you can't hide chats in project folders. And I'm not sure that you can archive them either. So eventually what you can bulk delete them, which is kind of what I want to be able to do in all these tools, but you can't you can pin things, but you just have like, now I just have this like infinite scrolling list of chats in Claude. And I can't really get rid of them. I can't archive them. If I put them in a project folder, they still stay in my recents. So from like a management of this chat and these conversations, ChatGPT works more like a lot more like a notes app where you can put things in folders and organize them and stuff like that. I don't know what's really better. I find that these tools are better for certain things. I find like the web research, running deep research, they work well. I do find that maybe ChatGPT is a little bit more thorough from a web research tool perspective. It tends to format documents a little bit nicer. Like I've sent you like deep research from both. It tends to format it, but then but if it's written in prose, then the Claude stuff sounds better. I think a lot of these tools, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. I'm still not a huge fan of Gemini. I've been told that the models that Gemini are using are much better now, and I believe it. But I don't like the way it writes. I don't like the interface. Copilot has a terrific interface, much nicer and cleaner, but I find the outputs to be lackluster. I think maybe they're a little bit more railed. I think if people are interested in focusing on these tools, having played with a lot of them, I guess my tip of the week is that those are kind of the two main platforms that offer functionality. One of the cool things that I'm interested in that Claude has over ChatGPT is this idea of co-work. So you can actually give it access to aspects of your computer. Like you can give it access to the whole computer if you want. I have not done that yet. I have a folder I've given it access to in my documents that's called Claude. So I can put stuff in there and it can work in that folder. And I have given it access to Apple Notes. So it can search for my notes. It can go amend notes. It can take things that I've told it to do and make a new note. And so that's really handy. But yeah, like Claude can actually like run your device, not on mobile, but on a desktop computer. Yeah. And so that's kind of cool. I've heard of people like, find all the bloatware on my computer and delete it. And I'm like, all right, like all sorts of interesting things you can do with Claude. I don't know that there's a clear winner though. I think it's just pros and cons. I think that the thinking models for coding and data analysis and text and writing are a little bit in favor of Claude. ChatGPT is kind of a more well-rounded tool. You get a lot more. I think it's a better value that you get images, you get video creation, you get a bunch of stuff, right? You don't get any of that with Claude. It's very basic.
Yeah. Although on the image creation now, it feels like Gemini might be the better one.
I'm sure it is.
Now it's like that nano banana or whatever.
That's Google.
Yeah, they've removed that even in so now it's just images.gemini or what have you that you look for. So but anyways, yeah, I mean
but I still get really impressive images from all of them. So it's kind of like, do you want a Tercel or a Camry? Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, they're fine. 90, good enough most of the time. Claude is expensive. It's more expensive. It's closer to $30 a month. So I don't know. I don't know what's best. One of the things I've been doing is working a lot more with these local models. You can actually install them. That was the next thing I was going to talk about. So Ollama is the desktop app. There's a graphic user interface, but you can chat with the models in terminal. You don't have to use it. And so you just have to, there's some, if you ask an AI, even a free one, it'll tell you how to install Llama on any operating system. It gives you the terminal command walkthrough. So right now, the models I have installed on Ollama is I have Llama 3.1, which is the open source model from Facebook. Qwen 3, which is I think it's a Chinese model. And then I have one from Gemma 3, 4 billion parameters, and that's from Google. That's their offline model. So the B means how many billions of parameters. So the more parameters, 30 billion, billion parameters needs a lot of RAM. So if you have an 8 gigabyte RAM computer or even 16 gigs of RAM, it's going to be slow and it's going to be unreliable. So kind of 4 billion parameters to 8 billion is kind of the sweet spot. The lower the parameters, the faster it'll be, but the less robust, right? So far I like Llama the best, the 8 billion parameter model, but there's lots of them. It's pretty cool. I don't know if there's like a huge difference. Some of these do image recognition. So there's all sorts of really interesting stuff that you can do with the models. I will say that I really like that you can run these local models on mobile devices now. There's a bunch of apps from the app stores, Android and iOS. I don't know which one is better. Some of them are paid, some of them are not. The one that I have been using just for free because to test this stuff is an app called Locally. So Locally AI. So you can, it's just an app. It's free on the iOS App Store. There's some really, I think it might also be on other platforms, but these are a dime a dozen. And they'll just, download the model directly. So they take it right from the repository and then it's working on device. So these are, you don't even have to be connected to the internet to use these, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, depending on the device you have, it'll actually recommend models that your device can handle.
Okay, nice.
But they are not anywhere near as good as the frontier models from Anthropic or OpenAI. So, you're for simple text revision, stuff like that, but your mileage will certainly vary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that's basically all I have to say. I don't have a lot of, I suppose, insights other than there's 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
Yeah. No, and again, I mean, I think you should try out. I would still, I think it's good to, be proficient in one and just focusing on that. But as new features come out, you never know. And I would encourage one thing that I think a lot of people, they don't realize, the paid versions are much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially because you get access to the reasoning models. Yeah. And that's really where the advantages are. But with that, I think that's more or less what we had to talk about today. So I guess we will end it there.
All right, sounds good. Until next time.
You bet. Take care.